As we all know, right across the globe, 2020 was a year defined by one thing in particular: face masks. Although they'd been a popular fashion accessory in China for decades, it was only in 2020 that the fashion really spread to other countries, and boy did it take off. It seemed like everyone was wearing a face mask this year, and there were of course a whole range of designs. So prevalent was the trend that many shops started refusing entry to anyone who wasn't getting with the global fashion event. Yet somehow, amidst the all-encompassing global preoccupation with face masks, artists continued to release music. In total, I've listened through just over 650 albums released this year, and although barely any actually have anything to do with face masks per se, there are plenty of absolutely brilliant ones. Although the start of the year was somewhat slow for album releases, the latter part more than picked up the slack, and as a result 2020 actually ended up having just as many great releases as 2019, if not more. In the main part of this video, I run through what are in my opinion the 100 best studio albums and EPs of the year, out of all those that I heard. On screen now are 24 honourable mentions. To economise on time, I'll be giving brief summaries of just a handful of the albums ranked between 100 and 51, and then presenting what makes each album in the top half of the list so worthwhile a listen. All but 4 of these albums are freely available to listen to via mainstream streaming services such as Spotify or Apple Music. The releases ranked at 83, 35, 32 and 20 being the exceptions, and 3 out of 4 of these are instead available for streaming on Bandcamp. As the vast majority of the list is freely available to stream, I hope you take the opportunity to try out any releases which you like the sound of but haven't already heard for yourself. As we go through the list, picks which have been given less attention by professional music publications are indicated with this symbol, to draw particular attention to a few underrated gems. Although there's a lot of superlatives used in this video, these really are devastatingly good albums, deserving of all the praise I heap on them. Without further ado then, let's kick things off and run through the top albums of 2020. 100. Blue Hearts by Bob Mould. Building upon the successes of 2016's Patch the Sky and 2019's Sunshine Rock, Blue Hearts is just as fast-paced and hard-hitting and even more political. Compared to its predecessor, its songs are far less joyfully exuberant and far more tormented, making it an album which really epitomises the anguish of life in 2020 on a planet where the political right reigns supreme, black lives are still delegitimised, and governments only pay lip service to addressing the climate and ecological emergency. 99. Folklore by Taylor Swift. 98. Whole Lotta Red by Playboi Carti. 97. Dimensional Stardust by Rob Mazurek and Exploding Star Orchestra. 96. Free IH, This Is Not the One You've Been Waiting For by Illuminati Hotties. 95. Sorry for the Late Reply by Slutface. 94. Anime Trauma and Divorce by Open Mike Eagle. As its title suggests, Open Mike Eagle's latest release deals with an unusual combination of subject matter. For the most part, its tracks are intensely autobiographical, and if you're not sure what I mean by that, give the track, The Black Mirror episode, a listen. It boasts immaculate production and some excellent bars, from a rapper who appears to be at his creative peak right now, and of course, the live recording it closes out with is pretty darn cute. 93. Breach by Fen Lily. 92. Shore by Fleet Foxes. 91. Who Are the Girls by Nova Twins. Furious and fast-paced rock, which definitely sounds very alternative. Its lyrics astutely touch on some serious subject matter too, which is a nice added bonus. Nova Twins have penned a very enigmatic album, which is as frenetic and wild as it is proficient. I'm fascinated to hear what they come up with next. 90. Thank You for Using GTL by Drakeo the Ruler. 89. Inner Song by Kelly Lee Owens. 88. Cape Sierra by Kalone. 87. Indigo Dream by Emma. 86. Never Not Together by Nada Surf. 85. Raka by Vladislav Delay. 84. Dedicated, Side B by Carly Rae Jepsen. I honestly don't much care for Dedicated. Compared to Emotion, its own B-sides collection, it fell flat for me, with too many forgettable moments. In contrast though, Dedicated Side B is almost flawless from start to finish, and therefore manages to actually outshine its mother project. Most importantly perhaps, it proves beyond a doubt that Emotion was no fluke, as Jepsen's music's perfect blend of sensual and majestic pop is on killer form again here. 83. God Has Nothing to Do With This, Leave Him Out of It by Backwash. 82. Shall We Go On Sinning So That Grace May Increase by The Soft Pink Truth. 81. Ungodly Hour by Chloe and Halle. 80. In Memory of My Feelings by Catherine Ann Davies and Bernard Butler. 79. We're New Again by Makaya McCraven. 78. Sex, Death and the Infinite Void by Creeper. 77. Apollo by Fireboy DML. 76. Apple by A.G. Cook. 75. Optimisme by Songhoi Blues. If you decide to listen to one rock album by a Malian band in the near future, make it this one. Songhoi Blues' album certainly lives up to its name, oozing ebullient choruses, brimming with joy from every pore. Although their punchy style of rock has some very western stylings, it's underpinned by moments of eccentricity, giving the album a distinct exotic quality that recalls its diverse roots. Optimisme forcefully demonstrates that Songhoi Blues can create better rock music than most of their popular western contemporaries. 74. Covers by Marika Hackman. 73. From This Place by Pat Metheny. 72. Jump Rope Gazers by The Beths. 71. Ghost 6, Locust by Nine Inch Nails. When Nine Inch Nails surprise released 2 new albums continuing their Ghost cycle in March, and both were available as a free download, it was exciting to say the least. Although similar stylistically, and both serving to reflect on the pandemic, the 2 albums diverge almost entirely in tone. Whereas the industrial rock of its counterpart Together is markedly upbeat and breezy, the aesthetic of Locust is far more tortured and downtrodden. It's the more consistent of the 2 throughout its runtime in terms of quality, and precisely because it's so unremittingly bleak, it also does a better job of capturing the oppressive mood of 2020. 70. Tongue presents Dead Club by Tongue. If you're going to make a concept album about the personal and cultural experience of death, it's not a bad idea in the slightest to make it absolutely hilarious at points. As the album's second track opines, death is the new sex, coming soon to fuck us all. At the same time, there are many moments on the album which are thought-provoking too, and a handful which are truly profound. Aesthetically, there are some nice touches here and there, and Tongue's variety of folk rock cleaves very close in sonic terms to late-period Chumbawamba. 69. Fix Tape by Popcorn. 68. The Ends by the OBGMs. 67. What's Your Pleasure by Jessie Ware. 66. Paid Salvation by A. Swayze and the Ghosts. 65. Flight Tower by Dirty Projectors. 64. Bitter Zoot by Yves Javisier. A powerful and resonant set of dramatic pop tunes from the Dutch singer-songwriter. As Visser has stated in interviews, you don't have to be able to speak German to understand her music, because the vocals blend so seamlessly with its soundscape that Bitter Zoot effortlessly conjures up moods across an expansive emotional palette, independently of the precise content of its lyrics. It's all incredibly danceable too, and it's just unfortunate timing that soon after the album's release, the nightclubs of the world were forced to close as a result of the face mask craze. 63. Erratics and Unconformities by Craven Faults. 62. Well Worries by To Do List. An almost entirely critically ignored album of hazy rock, stunningly infused with strains of chiptune. It makes for a really accomplished offering, due in part to the pairing of its lo-fi aesthetic and smooth tempo against its contrastingly urgent lyrics. Indeed, the lyrics on Well Worries are often really clever, and the album features some very poignant songwriting throughout. Although there's always something special about coming across a great album, which is almost entirely unheard of, this is a project which deserves to be heard by as many people as possible. 61. I'm Your Empress Of by Empress Of. 60. Letter to You by Bruce Springsteen. Although I might be a slight bit biased, given that I waited up until midnight for its release, it's safe to say that Letter to You is another great Bruce Springsteen album. Specifically, it's his best studio album since Magic in 2007, but still doesn't quite reach the lofty peaks of his pre-1990s catalogue. For fans of that era, however, the track Janie Needs a Shooter is a real throwback to Springsteen's more character-focused narrative style. As a whole, Letter to You comprises a diverse collection of tracks, and whilst it isn't as cohesive as many of Springsteen's classic works, there's a real charm to its more haphazard character. 59. Pain Olympics by Crack Cloud. 58. The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny Demo by Mr. Bungle. 57. Inlet by Hum. 56. Ecstasy by Disclosure. 55. Heavy Light by US Girls. 54. Taken Away by Moody Man. Vergangenheidsbeweging by Slauson Malone. Very much continuing in the vein of his 2019 album Quiet Farewell, Slauson Malone continues to redefine the boundaries of what rap songs can be, with another collection of miniature pieces. Both spacey and atmospheric, the album's individual tracks manage to create something intensely powerful when put together as a whole, despite their brevity. 52. Encanto por Mexico Volume 1 by Natalia Lafourcade. 51. Phanerozoic 2, Mesozoic and Cenozoic by The Ocean. 50. The Prettiest Curse by Heinz. Kicking off my top 50 is Spanish band Heinz' glitchy, harmonious and powerful The Prettiest Curse. With punchy choruses and gorgeous hooks aplenty, this is a dazzlingly summery project and a hugely fun listen. The members of Heinz have a great synergy, and the album's production really makes the most of that, creating a swirling, cacophonous atmosphere filled by static and transient, murmuring vocal lines. Its sleek positivity and exuberance make for a very welcome reprieve from the trials of 2020. 49. The Baby by Samir. A masterful, smart and sophisticated album of evocative songs about love and the many ups and downs of romantic relationships. As Samir's debut full-length work, it establishes her prodigious songwriting abilities, and by steadfastly proving the immense potential of her refreshingly laid-back and lyrically grounded approach to rock, it promises much more to come from her in the future. First off, in a very direct sense, there's a remixed version of The Baby set to drop later this month, featuring contributions from an assortment of big-name artists. 48. If We Make It Through December by Phoebe Bridgers. Although it's very short and put together from 4 cover songs, this EP is the best Christmas album I've heard in many years. On each track, Bridgers does a fantastic job of making the song her own, and this is plainest on the cover of Simon & Garfunkel's 7 O'Clock News Silent Night, which updates the intercalated news snippets for our own modern times. 47. May Our Chambers Be Full by Emma Ruth Rundle and Thou. Its closing track, The Valley, perfectly encapsulates the album's tonally diverse soundscape. Rundle's vocals ever so gradually become more and more urgent in tandem with its instrumentation, until they simultaneously peak 7 minutes into the track and absolutely thunder along to the finish. Although it utilises metal tropes, this is a lovably distinctive album which is beholden to no genre conventions. Lyrically too, its quietly explicated psychological themes are a welcome change of pace from the generic norm. 46. Stare Into Death and Be Still by Ulcerate. The greatest metal albums are the ones which you can feel resonating through every inch of your body, and Stare Into Death and Be Still is absolutely crushing. It's also incredibly freaking immersive, and I find that its runtime quite honestly flies by. If it's meant to lull its listeners into a state of stupefied awe, as its title suggests, it most certainly succeeds. Although it's not the most accessible, and some may find its barrages of pummeling crescendos too savage, those who persevere with it will be richly rewarded. 45. The Balladeer by Laurie McKenna. Sweet, subtle, and yet immensely soulful country, with decidedly despondent stylings. Even on the album's fast-paced tracks with upbeat lyrics, McKenna has an uncanny talent for creating a melancholy atmosphere, and a sense of cloying fatalism accordingly predominates throughout The Balladeer. The songwriting here is top-drawer stuff, with plenty of hard-hitting moments, despite the album's relatively simple arrangements. If you want to give it a go, the wistful track, When You're My Age, which features Hilary Lindsay and Liz Rose, is a great place to start. 44. Wake of a Nation by Zealanada. Continuing the success of their fantastic 2018 album Stranger Fruit, this EP once again takes the familiar basis of metal music in strange new directions. It also engages very directly with racially motivated police brutality in the United States, so it's obviously quite an emotive listen, with a very serious message to convey. 43. Likewise by Frances Quinlan. Frances Quinlan has already established a name for herself in the rock canon as frontwoman of the band Hopalong, yet her debut solo effort has many of its own charms. Although less experimental than a band's output tends to be, her voice works fantastically against the very elegant soft rock stylings of the tracks on Likewise. The album's songs tell some captivating stories, and its stream of consciousness lyrical style offers interesting insights into the psyches of Quinlan's characters. 42. Awake in the Brain Chamber by Secret Machines. As Secret Machines demonstrate here, shoegaze music is bloody exhilarating when played at a fast tempo. In addition, Awake in the Brain Chamber is packed full of swirling melodies and devastatingly serene vocals. With its energetic pace and evocative lyrics added to the mix, listening through the album makes for a truly blissful way to spend half an hour. However, and although this is mostly a compliment, it is one of those albums which I wish were longer, as it's still absolutely hitting it out of the park at the point that it draws to a close. 41. Strange Lights Over Garth Mountain by Gwennifer Raymond. The things that Raymond can do with a guitar astounds me, and no, that's no Beatles-esque innuendo. The incredibly organic tunes which she manages to create with that one instrument are just so achingly evocative, summoning to mind mental images of open vistas, running streams, and somehow managing to epitomise the majesty of nature more broadly. She really is so immensely skilled that it's almost impossible to even begin to comprehend the technical complexity of her stunning performances. 40. Ellen Geist by Crippled Black Phoenix. Although a healthy 54 minutes in length, Ellen Geist is actually only a mini or side album by their standards, according to Crippled Black Phoenix, a band whose projects frequently exceed the hour mark. Regardless, nothing about the album feels miniature or second-rate in the slightest. Backed by an array of vocal leads, the album journeys through a wealth of sonic territory. Albeit, the majority of its themes are fairly maudlin, yet it's filled with inventive flourishes, which combine to mould it into something so much more nuanced. 39. Atlas Vending by Metz. It's hard to define the sound of Metz. Sure, Atlas Vending leans heavily into the territories of punk and alternative rock, but on another level their music is just somehow tantalisingly inimitable. Vocally, comparisons can be drawn to Nirvana, although Kurt Cobain actually wanted listeners to be able to hear the lyrics he sang. Nevertheless, it seems somewhat disingenuous to attempt to pin down their sound so methodically, when it sounds so fresh and striking. What this album is, when it comes down to it, is a great, passionately delivered collection of rock-laden tracks, with a palpable edge of mystery. 38. The Ghost Inside by The Ghost Inside. Vibrant and poundingly urgent metal. Unusually though, this is heavy metal with rock sensibilities, as strange as that may sound. Schematically, its tracks are closer in structural terms to the hook-laden bombast of mainstream rock outfits than The Ghost Inside's metal sensibilities would suggest. Resultantly, it's very much an album which tempts you to sing along with its largely optimistic lyrical peaks. As a result, when you listen through the album, you're enveloped by all these huge emotional climaxes, manifesting unexpectedly out of its roiling atmospherics. 37. Obsidian by Paradise Lost. Like many contemporary doom metal albums, Obsidian features a heady amount of religious lyrical themes, but the band's exceptional performances set the album apart from its stylistic brethren. Featuring breathtaking riffs and moments of tranquility to counterbalance its heaviest passages, it makes use of its substantial runtime to craft an epic about mortality and the futility of life. Although it has prominent gothic elements, its aesthetic draws from a host of thematic territories, and there's a fascinating richness to it as a result. 36. Melee by Dogleg. Fast-paced and emotional rock anthems, backed by some lovely crisp production. The band's energetic performances and punchy songwriting style makes this a really fun listen that sounds not only impassioned, but also disarmingly beautiful at its most candid moments. Its nerdy overtures are also on point, from its Nintendo referencing title to its track War Turtle. Lyrically, Melee deals with themes of nihilism and emotional insecurity, but as a musical equivalent of a care package, it ends up being far more uplifting than it would appear on paper. 35. Future Conjunto. In concept, this album is a pretty unique proposition. It's a Mexican-led science fiction narrative and multimedia project, sold in support of Black Lives Matter, featuring contributions from a range of smaller artists performing in numerous genres, and held together by an entertaining bridging narrative. Centred around the concept of a citizen living centuries in the future, using the AI of a digital archive service to trace their family history, and watching a recording of a clandestine music festival. Whilst the album is overwhelmingly dystopian in character, The individual contributions by the performers at this futuristic concert provide an incredibly timely science-fictional reflection on the racial and environmental problems which look set to define our own century. Despite how strange this sounds, the album's narrative holds together really solidly, and the range of different performances coalesce really nicely. I'd recommend checking out the Simon Arder contribution, Heat Death in particular, as a captivating starting point. 34. Loom by Katie Gately. Abstract and mysterious. Although it's a hard album to describe as a result of its eclectic experimentalism, it's certainly very dark and brooding tonally. It also creates a really expansive sound and showcases tons of really interesting ideas. Loom was inspired by Gately's mother passing away, and although it's certainly not mired in sorrow, the album's preoccupations with the darker aspects of life, and indeed death, predominate sonically. All the same, it's a surprisingly calming listen, and one which repays repeated listens. 33. Waiting Out the Storm by Jeremy Ivy. Right from its outset, this is an album which stakes out its claim to providing passionate social critiques paired with luscious guitar work. It also deals with a lot of heavy themes lyrically, including the climate crisis, PTSD, and the manifold interrelated inequalities which our modern societies are built upon. As singer-songwriter albums go, it's both ambitious and piercing, besides being really intelligent and consistent across its runtime. Additionally, Ivy's listless vocal delivery complements the rampant pessimism and cynicism of the album's lyrics brilliantly. 32. We Live Here by Bob Vylan. Consisting of 8 bite-sized tracks, British band Bob Vylan's 2020 EP hits hard and in rapid succession. Exposing the institutional and cultural racism at the heart of British society, it's essentially one protracted scream asserting the value of black lives. Although it's sadly not available on any streaming service in its entirety, many of its tracks are freely available to listen to on an individual basis. 31. Alias by Shy Girl. Alias is an astoundingly accomplished debut EP, which is so goddamn erotically laden and sexy that it's really quite distracting to listen to. Delightful and rich, it creates its own distinctive sound. At less than 20 minutes, it's tantalisingly short, and it makes me really look forward to whenever Shy Girl releases a full-length project. 30. YHLQMDLG by Bad Bunny. Admittedly, reggaeton is a genre I've rarely come into contact with, so I can't profess to be an expert on how this album compares to other Puerto Rican releases in the genre, but amongst Bad Bunny's somewhat uneven discography, it's a real highlight for sure. Hedonistic and vibrant, the album maintains a high level of consistency, exhibiting a wide-ranging variety of gorgeously melodic trap tracks. Additionally, the album's numerous features are so seamlessly integrated into the core of its sound that the whole thing flows incredibly smoothly. 29. American Head by the Flaming Lips. Talk about a comeback album. When the songs are of high quality, Flaming Lips albums really are irresistible, with their familiar, fuzzy, retro soundscapes. Glossy and psychedelic, American Head is less an album than a cerebral experience. It's an adrenaline-fueled rock epic concept album about, amongst other things, mental transcendence and achieving self-actualization through recreational drug use. Ultimately, it tells a very uplifting and romantic narrative set against a glorious ocean of distorted riffs. 28. Blonde on the Tracks by Emma Swift. Is it heresy to make the claim that the album of Bob Dylan covers which Emma Swift released in 2020 is better than Bob Dylan's latest original album, Rough and Rowdy Ways, released just 2 months earlier? I mean, both are certainly worth hearing, but Blonde on the Tracks is quite honestly in a different league in my estimation. Swift's voice, for one thing, sounds absolutely phenomenal, reinterpreting Dylan's original material. The roster of songs selected is just about impeccable too, ranging across Dylan's discography, with a few deep cuts. Although covers albums are a notoriously difficult artistic prospect, this one does everything right. The gender-bending move of covering The Man in Me is a particularly adroit decision too. 27. Origin of the Alimonies by Liturgy. Avant-garde metal. The classical tendencies and propensities prevalent throughout lead a suitably epic character to the album. Melodically, it thrives upon generating irascible sonic tensions between its instruments, and tonally, it oscillates between an array of moods, creating a discernibly tense and weird atmosphere to the composition as a whole. At its thundering crescendos, the album seems to be on the brink of shattering the fabric of space-time itself. 26. A Billion Heartbeats by Mystery Jets. Mystery Jets are one of many artists on this list who released 2 albums in 2020, in spite of the constraints imposed by the face mask craze. A Billion Heartbeats, which was the first of the 2, is a real classic. There's phenomenal guitar work throughout, and in general, the band sounds excellent. There's such an impeccable synergy between each of the instruments. As the placards on the album cover hint, it's an album engaged in the ideal of resistance against the political status quo, despite its characteristically sunny sound palette. 25. Skins and Slime by Oliver Coates. Ponderous, glitchy, and very understated, Coates creates a wall of synthetic noise, allowing his cello melodies to build upon it and soar free. At its peaks, it seems to fill the room with its dense yet ethereal melodies. Although many of the album's movements are divine, Caregiver Part 4 is absolutely hauntingly beautiful, music so complete that it most certainly requires no vocal component to speak candidly to listeners. Although I should note that the Malibu feature on the closing piece works brilliantly. Imagine a purely instrumental Kraftwerk album, except with an even more sophisticated classical basis, and you're not far off. 24. My Agenda by Dorian Electra. There's a hell of a lot of depth to My Agenda, despite its short runtime. As with their debut Flamboyant, Electra takes on the persona of a rather unlikable character and uses their performance to show the inadequacies of traditional gender constructs. Even harder hitting in lyrical terms than Electra's debut, this is a sharply pointed tongue-in-cheek concept album, whose narrative overtures may be triggering to some listeners. Its aesthetic is also incredibly harsh, and so abrasive you can always feel it shredding your ears as you listen. 23. Sawayama. Irresistibly catchy, sexy and hard-hitting, this is exactly how pop is supposed to sound. On tracks like XS, Sawayama's vocal delivery is so assured and powerful that it practically takes my breath away. The J-pop influences really shine through too, on tracks like Akasaka Sad, giving the album a really rich aesthetic palette. Its free-spirited energy is truly a thing to behold. If you've somehow avoided hearing this masterpiece up until now, I'd recommend the sugary Paradising as an ideal entry point. 22. Star Maker by Honey Harper. Although its competition was admittedly rather more lacklustre than usual this year, Star Maker is an album that is without a shadow of a doubt deserving of the accolade of being my favourite country album of the year. Shunning the bombast of contemporary mainstream country music, Star Maker is a sedate mid-tempo affair which stylistically opts for contemplation over hedonism. The results are achingly gorgeous and endlessly re-listenable. As Casey Musgraves did with her 2018 album Golden Hour, Honey Harper has succeeded in making a country album which is so transcendent and original that it cannot conceivably be ignored by those vocal critics who accuse the genre of being stagnant and outdated. 21. Song for Our Daughter by Laura Marling. Folk albums which are as bare bones as this aesthetically either live or die by the quality of their songwriting and lyricism. On both counts, Song for Our Daughter resolutely succeeds. Due to Marling's immersive storytelling, the emotional peaks and troughs of the album are a real rollercoaster ride. Intimate and heartfelt, this is an album which quietly demands the entire attention of its listeners, and rewards them accordingly with its lush, delicately rendered portraits of the emotional travails we undergo in modern life. 20. Stigmata by Backwash. This is the EP of the year, in my estimation, and my god, does it go hard. The metal influences throughout make this a really unique synthesis of genres, and it only builds on the successes of Backwash's other 2020 release. There are few, if any, hip-hop artists pushing the boundaries of what the genre can be as successfully as Backwash is. 19. Set My Heart on Fire Immediately by Perfume Genius. Serene and gorgeously ornate. A beautiful portrait of queer identity and the joys of embodied existence and sensuality. Pensive, captivatingly introspective and impeccably produced, this is most certainly a worthy successor to 2017's No Shape, and it would be no understatement to claim that Perfume Genius has already established himself as a truly groundbreaking queer artist at this point. The album is absolutely majestic and showcases a real knack for captivating songwriting and melody. 18. Untitled Rise by Salt. The British R&B collective Salt released 2 untitled albums this year, and whilst both are definitely worthwhile, it's the later one, subtitled Rise, which really shines on repeated listens, with its subtler take on the same race-centric themes, tighter sequencing, and a more cohesive soundscape. It's a sophisticated and nuanced work, with a really smooth and silky ethos that transcends the racial violences that the album stands in passionate opposition to. Its message could hardly be stated any more powerfully. 17. The Passion Of by Special Interest. The performances here are so fraught that there's a very palpable tension which imposes itself upon you as you listen. The band's focused rage shines through the distorted vocal palette, and the beats really do rock. This is a smart and subversive punk album, which desires far less to be understood as to be felt in the soul. Particularly given that it's Special Interest's sophomore album, this really is an outstanding work of art that's devastatingly creative and sublime. 16. We Will Always Love You by The Avalanches. Like Playboi Carti's Whole Lotta Red, this is a brilliant album, which I'm firmly convinced would have turned up on a lot more critic year-end lists if it hadn't been released in December, after many of them were already published. Although I liked the Avalanche's 2016 album Wildflower, this follow-up absolutely blew me away and wholly exceeded my expectations. A bombastic yet incredibly emotive album about loss, and one which helped me through a hard time. It's just a non-stop carousel of gorgeous sounds and a very potent work of art. 15. Swirling by Sun Ra Orchestra. It's always fascinating to hear new releases from artists who long since established themselves as major figures in the landscape of popular music. It's an absolute joy when those new works rank among the best of their output and manage to recapture the artist's classic sound, as Swirling does. It's a truly exceptional comeback album from a legendary Afrofuturist outfit, which is both sprawling and complex. Swirling is a psychedelic jazz odyssey which plays out like the soundtrack to an intergalactic voyage. Like Sun Ra's other masterpieces, it feels timeless and otherworldly. 14. Boniface by Boniface. Boniface is a hugely intimate and autobiographical debut album, written over the course of years, and the results of those behind-the-scenes processes are palpable, as there are few artists whose first full-length albums have ever been this strong. The undiluted bombast of its synth arrangements alone is to die for, and the lyrics and relatable narrative-led songwriting are just as stunning. It's entirely appropriate that it was released on Valentine's Day, as it's a very romantic album, both lyrically and tonally, with its glistening synths and lyrical preoccupation with love in all its forms. 13. Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa. A best-selling pop album where the breakup songs are actually cathartic and the love songs are sexy and heartfelt. Hella danceable at the same time and never boring, with next to no filler tracks. It's also got very well-written lyrics for a mainstream pop album too, and it's very well produced. It's an album which takes the familiar bridge-chorus structure and really makes it feel new, by virtue of its killer hooks and captivating vocals. The remix by the Blessed Madonna, which came out later in the year, is also really worthwhile, and does a fantastic job of emphasising just how much depth there is to the songwriting here, and the sheer extent to which the entirety of the album is viable for club and rave playlists. Unfortunately, its penultimate track, Good in Bed, is somewhat more generic than the rest of the album, and borders on annoying with its overly repetitive chorus line. Nevertheless, this is the kind of album which really justifies the endeavour to remain a poptimist. 12. Confusing Mix of Nations by CMON. An album practically bursting with a plethora of somewhat Pet Shop Boys-esque, jubilant pop with EDM and electronica influences. Fun and vibrant, but impeccably produced and remarkably refined. The phenomenal level of excellent songwriting on display here would no doubt be envied by many mainstream pop artists. Most of the songs on the album sound just like they were meant to be dance floor hits, in some alternate universe where more refined musical tastes prevail. Check out the effusive track, Dream Fucking, if you feel like giving the album a try. 11. My Echo by Laura Veirs. Amongst other things, this is undoubtedly 2020's greatest breakup album. It's also incredibly poetic and laid back, such that its murkier undercurrents only become apparent when close attention is paid to its tormented lyrics. Intentionally, the sense of calm which permeates the album makes for a very welcome and beautiful refuge from precisely the torment of those devastating emotions that inspired its lyrics. Closing track, Vapour Trails, is an absolute must-hear. It sounds so achingly bittersweet and yet so gorgeous at the same time that you can't help but reflect on your own experiences of heartbreak. 10. Because of a Flower by Anna Roxanne. An experimental lullaby oozing with ephemeral beauty. A patchwork of serene, subtle melodies which are so gorgeously elegant that they are wholly calming. Its sheer calmness and tranquility are almost otherworldly, in fact. If you let it work its subtle magic and shut yourself off from the distractions of the outside world for 3/4 of an hour, it's proper shiver down the spine stuff. It's the strange sort of transcendently defiant and indefinable album, and moreover experience, which has the potential to cause even a complete naysayer to reconsider the transformative and effective powers which music has to move us and alter our emotional states. Forget lo-fi beats channels on YouTube, this is where it's really at. As the album's Bandcamp page reveals, the predominant stimulus for these compositions was Roxanne's journey towards identifying as intersex, and as this suggests, Because of a Flower is an album which works so perfectly precisely because it rejects the status quo and transcends the easy categories which we use to simplify our lives. Though few of us will have analogous experiences to Roxanne, the process of connecting with the album brings us to readily sense the beauty of her difference. 9. Molecular Meditation by Jansen Werner. A bizarre and eclectic collaboration between the frontman of Mouse on Mars and the late Mark E. Smith of The Fall. This is actually one of the rare posthumous albums deserving of praise on its own terms, rather than receiving acclaim as a form of critical virtue signalling. The 20-minute title track almost exclusively features ambient drone-like electronica, interspersed with short spoken passages consisting of inanities and non sequiturs. An album this radically avant-garde certainly won't appeal to everyone, but for those who persevere, there's a rich vein of satisfaction to be gleaned from the album's leisurely, understated progress through ideas and concepts. In many ways, it sounds something like a person's stream of consciousness, transposed into musical form. Ever playful and fragmentary, it seems like an album which is designed to obtusely reject every aspect of melody and harmony. Each time it appears on the verge of breaking into a distinct melody, it pulls the rug of familiarity from under the listener's feet. 8. RTJ4 by Run the Jewels. Judging by all the classic flows and verses on RTJ4, there's still plenty of life in the classic hip-hop formula yet, even as the genre adjusts to spearheading the cultural mainstream, as opposed to being an underground culture. With such excellent tracks like Walking in the Snow, RTJ are never at danger of becoming symptoms of the problem. Their anger at the ills of society shines through like a beacon of hope, and the album's release at the peak of the BLM protests could hardly have been more timely. The duo synergy, too, seems only to strengthen with each successive release, and at this point Killer Mike and ELP really do sound like they were destined to rap in tandem. On RTJ4, all the features click into place effortlessly too. Although it must have been painstakingly refined for months on end to arrive in this flawless form, it feels entirely effortless and instantly classic as you listen through it. And the best thing of all, it's available just like all their previous albums for free. As it happens, this might actually be the best free album to have been released by a major commercial artist since Radiohead's In Rainbows. 7. No Dream by Jeff Rosenstock. Just as ever, No Dream finds Rosenstock railing against the unequal and dehumanising power structures of neoliberal capitalism. What can we possibly do as individuals in societies where we have little to no control over the power structures which determine the conditions of our lives? As on his previous releases, Rosenstock's solution is to rock and refuse to acquiesce. These are straight-up anthems of defiance and nonconformity, practically begging to be screamed along with. As on the latter half of his earlier album Worry, the multitude of short songs format works brilliantly, parcellating the existential rage which permeates the album into neat snack-sized portions and building towards colossal emotional peaks. Although Rosenstock's post was somewhat of a disappointment as a whole, No Dream picks up back exactly where the frenetic swells of existential angst which define Worry left off. In almost every way, it sounds like a direct spiritual successor to that earlier masterpiece. I mean, how many albums can you name with refrains which turn a crusade against the rise of Airbnb into an open invitation to rave along in the face of the futility of modern life? Its deep-seated nihilism is always presented in a format which is absolutely captivating and often more or less compulsive. 6. Ohms by Deftones. As you'd expect from Deftones, Ohms is a metal album which not only goes hard, but is also really creative. To call this simply metal would be akin to calling a Formula One car merely a hatchback. As the field recordings of Seabirds interposed into Pompeii illustrate, Deftones are not interested in making music which can easily be categorised into neat genre labels. For listeners, that makes the end results of their endeavours endlessly interesting. The album's aesthetic even draws close in some moments to riffing off of something akin to the characteristic sound palettes of My Bloody Valentine. With lyrics predicated upon death, rebirth, biblical concepts of sin, and other fatalistic themes, it's certainly quite bleak lyrically, and the album does a fantastic job of conveying that mood to its listeners. In particular, the performances throughout are exceptional, elevating the album above much of the band's back catalogue. Closing track Headless and the album's eponymous track are an especially strong back-to-back pairing, in many senses saving the best for last and delivering a crushing finale. This may not quite have ended up as my favourite metal album of the year, but it's certainly a very close second. 5. Shortly After Takeoff by BC Camplight. Shortly After Takeoff features exceptional immersive storytelling with tons of hilarious wry humour which often probes the darker side of human behaviour and motivations. It takes an acute writer to evoke human characters so vividly through the medium of song. The album's enthralling observations on everyday life are a powerful antidote to disillusionment with our daily routines, doing a great job of defamiliarising the many parts of our lives we habitually take for granted. It's also a fascinating portrait of moments from the life of an American living in the sleepy rural county of Cheshire in England. Featuring lush orchestrations paired with mental angst, the album feels so brilliantly dysfunctional, really bringing a sense of humanity to the darker, troubled emotions its songs coalesce around. It's a huge emotional rush to listen to, as a number of its songs start off downcast, but then gradually build towards joyful and uplifting finales, which never feel anything short of totally earned. As a whole, Shortly After Takeoff is an album which conveys the joys of life, in spite of the hardships we face, and its cautious optimism is more welcome than ever in this strange year. Its ability to soothe listeners through pure escapism and empathy is nothing short of sublime. 4. Oinos Soimain Soita by Havakroonu. What the relatively unheard of Finnish band Havakroonu have created is truly exhilarating. The album's unfolding soundscape takes the listener on a journey filled with prog rock influences, particularly moments reminiscent of Pink Floyd. And I don't mean to imply that it's derivative in any way, because in my eyes this album either equals or outranks every Pink Floyd album. It also doesn't sound in the slightest bit generic, and when you listen to metal intensively that becomes a very laudable quality. This is the sort of metal album which is so expansive that you can lose yourself in its flow. Equally, however, the album's brevity is an asset, and absolutely leaves the listener wanting more rather than less, giving it a very strong quality of replayability. It's truly stunning that the band achieved so much in such a short space of time, compared to many other epic albums. The album's skillful layering of its vocals into a rather choir-like arrangement makes for a refreshing move beyond the monotonous norm of one-tone lyrical delivery in black metal. It's an album populated by absolutely killer riffs, nuanced performances, and finished off by a beautiful and rather unexpected closing passage in the final track, which disarmingly finds solace and closure, and suitably wraps up the truly epic journey the album has treated listeners to. 3. Origins de Luz by Priscilla Urmel. Deeply rooted in the Brazilian life world, Urmel's music consists of a seamless blend of field recordings and compositions, and is truly an experience to hear, especially in this format. Although this is a compilation album, which I don't normally rank amongst my favourite releases of the year, precisely because they aren't normally artistic statements, Origins de Luz very much deserves a place on this list, because it's far more than a best-of compilation. Collecting tracks from her 4 studio albums, of which 3 out of 4 were only ever released on vinyl, and in very limited quantities, the album's producer John Gomez has managed to resequence Urmel's decades-old work into a dazzlingly original form, which breathes new life into her exceptional, yet largely forgotten body of work. Out of the album's 15 tracks, 5 are from her 1990 album Cinematográfico, and another 5 are from her 1992 album Campo de Sonos. Wisely perhaps, only 3 tracks are from her more uneven 1986 debut Saber Sobre Viver, and although only a short sample of her 1989 soundtrack Tai Chi Gestos de Equilibrio is included, presumably because its internal cohesion makes it almost impossible to extract discrete passages from, that short sample successfully whets the appetite for that stunning composition in its entirety. Martin Pescador, the one remaining track, is unique to this collection I believe, although I have no idea whether it's an entirely new piece or an outtake from the period during which Urmel was active. Purely on the grounds of the exceptionally high quality of the remastering, Origins de Luz is an entirely worthwhile listen for Urmel connoisseurs, as it's a real treat to hear a composition sounding this crisp and wholesome. 2. Fetch the Bolt Cutters by Fiona Apple. As a critic, what is there left to say about Fiona Apple, or even this album for that matter? It's an album which certainly deserves all the praise it's garnered over the course of the year. Although Apple has never released a lacklustre album, this one is a clear highlight, even amongst her illustrious catalogue. The found objects basis of the instrumentation gives the album an uncanny vibe, making it sound just that little bit disturbingly off-kilter, and it sounds fascinating, and utterly distinct from any other album released this year as a result. Its instrumentation is perfectly paired with the album's unusually raw performances from Apple, which really showcase the full range of her vocals, and which teeter on the edge of descending into pure rage. There's a strong lyrical focus on women's experience as usual, and it narrates some engrossing stories throughout. Each of the 13 songs here stands well on its own terms as a significant musical statement of its own, but as a whole, they make for a real tour de force of an album that overflows with undistilled passion. Yet it nevertheless exhibits Apple's characteristic restraint and her predilection towards creating moments of peculiar rhythm and unexpected beauty. This is a near flawless album which absolutely screams Album of the Year, and indeed garnered that accolade from many professional music publications. In most other years it almost certainly would have achieved that position in my own list. 1. Motherhood by No Joy. Don't let the ornate, soothing opener Birthmark fool you. Motherhood is a relentless and wholly original synthesis of diverse genres. It incorporates lots of metal and electronica influences in addition to No Joy's trademark left-field take on shoegaze. Yet these influences are so seamlessly amalgamated that they never clash or feel forced. The album exhibits a dazzling sonic polyphony, which is entirely its own. This results in a dense and incredibly immersive soundscape, which changes constantly underfoot. Motherhood's frenetic pace and frenzied aesthetic makes for a real rollercoaster ride, making the album as elusive and irascible as it is sublime. This is in many ways a concept album about the life-changing experience and responsibility of its title, and that theme is communicated to listeners throughout, not merely via Motherhood's enigmatic lyrics, but also its sequencing. Although the early half of the album is a constant adrenaline rush, its tracks become less ethereal and more sedate and grounded as it proceeds. This gradual transition in tone gives listeners the lingering impression of time moving on, and life moving on alongside it. In closing track Kidder, there's a real sense of closure, and this drives home just how utterly cohesive the whole album is, despite the sheer amount of varied ideas it experiments with sonically. Amongst No Joy's releases, Motherhood stands apart, coalescing the ideas that earlier great albums, Wait to Pleasure and More Faithful, originated, into a truly classic journey of an album, which sounds something like the heart and mind singing in unison. The goat on the album cover doesn't simply reinforce the thematic notion of kids, it also perfectly visualises the fact that this album is the goat. And there we have it. These are the albums which helped me get through the face mask hellscape that 2020 has otherwise been. Please feel free to post a comment below if you like my choices, or even if you hate them. And here's to another great year of music in 2021.